Da, 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 da. Oh, wow. Does that not bring the memories flooding back? You know, Kathy Garver, I just don't believe this. 70 years in showbiz. You can't possibly have been. You must have been working from the womb.
Well, no, that's actually my sister. That started my doppelganger that had that 70 years. I'm really 20 years younger than she.
Of course you are. But you know, you look at your showbiz life and it is quite incredible. I think it was your mum that took you off to a dancing studio in Hollywood. In fact, the very same dancing studio, I understand it, as where the late, great Shirley Temple learned to dance.
That's right. At 3 years old. And of course, at that time, every mother thought that their daughter with little curly hair was going to be the next Shirley Temple. So I learned to sing and dance, and then a little later on ballet. I wasn't the next Shirley Temple, but I am the Kathy Garver that you know now so well, Greg.
One of your first appearances, Our Miss Brooks, with the legendary Eve Arden. What are your memories of that like, Kathy?
Well, I had a very small part, and that was one of my very first things to do. And I was playing a little Italian girl. I played like Italian girls, French girls, American Indian girls, but this was Italiano, and I had to imitate my father, and it was like, and that's what my father always did. So that was my big entree into television. But before that, the first thing that I did was a big motion picture, and that was
The Night of the Hunter.
Robert Mitchum, Shelley Winters, Lillian Gish, and it was directed by Charles Laughton. And that was his first and unfortunately last picture, because the movie got such awful reviews. And he says, well, I'm not going to continue that. I have accolades as an actor. Why should I set myself up as a director to be shot down? It has since become a great cult movie, and it's one of the top psychological thriller horror films that has ever been shot. And they were following kind of this German expressionism kind of a film where it was in black and white. And whenever there was a scene that really had a dramatic impart in one part of it, they would light that particular area, and where everything else was kind of in the dark. And then when it follows the story and there's a whole change, then everything is light. And it was really beautifully done, cinematography wise.
So, Kathy, what are your memories of working alongside the likes of Robert Mitchum and Shelley Winters?
As a child, you remember things through your senses, what things look like, what they smelled like, what they felt like. And I remember the very first day on that set, and we were doing a scene where Robert Mitchum, as a crazed preacher, comes down the stairs and he breaks all these, they were really not glass, but supposed glass, they were sugar, they were made of sugar. He breaks all of this stuff. And, and my first day ever on a movie set, and I'm going, whoa. And I'm sure my reaction of being startled was probably, very, of course, it was very, very real. And he was very, very real. But being a very smart little girl, I understood that it wasn't real and that this was just pretend. And because of that, I wasn't that scared, but he was very menacing as this preacher. And all the other people, Shelley Winters was a little cold and off, by herself. I remember that about her. Charles Laughton really was very amiable and worked with the kids and that were on the set, and got us to do what he wanted to do in a very fatherly kind of very nice way.
Tell me, what did your mum think, being surrounded by these Hollywood legends and her little girl in the middle of all of this?
She was a disciplined person. She had been an RN as a nurse, and we're Catholic. And so she had been trained by the nuns, and she imposed that on her other three children. And we were we towed the rope, and she was over there. She was quiet. She was observant. She was not pushy. She did what she was told. She got me always, to the set on time, and always dressed. And so she was really remarkable. And especially in the fact that she was not a pushy stage mom.
I think you were 9 when you were cast in I'll Cry Tomorrow, of course, with another great, Susan Hayward. What are your memories there?
I just was in a couple short scenes. And again, this was very early in my career. Mrs. Meglin from the Meglin Studios had always taught us when we were on stage, and singing and dancing, to smile, smile, smile. So I remember standing in a line of other girls that were to be chosen for this particular movie. And I'm going, and they picked a couple, and they didn't pick me, but I didn't care. I'm still smiling. I'm still smiling. And lo and behold, there they were. And they picked me out of the big line of girls to be in the movie.
And then, of course, you mentioned, we might touch on this. Indeed, we will. The 10 Commandments, Cecil B. DeMille. I mean, epics didn't come bigger than that. And you think about that cast too, Kathy, Charlton Heston, Yul Brynner, and there are you in the mix, originally cast as a slave girl, but as I understand the incredible story, Cecil B. DeMille so liked that kind of energy that you had that he expanded your role.
Yes, and I still was a slave girl, but I had just been hired as an extra. And so I was in a wagon, and we were all kind of exiting and going on to a future adventure and getting out of town, basically. And I had this little lamb in my arms. Mm-hmm. And all of a sudden I heard this great big voice yell out, "Don't let that little girl's face get in the camera." And I said, "Whoa. Did I do something wrong?" I'm thinking. I said, "Who is that? Is that God?" And Cecil B. DeMille, was on this great big crane because he was getting the whole scene. And so I thought it was God. It wasn't God. But I did that particular scene. And then after that was done, I met him and we chatted. And then the associate producer went over to my stalwart mother, who was always there, and says, "I think your daughter's going to be on this picture a lot longer." So, and I was. He wrote scenes for me with Charlton Heston, and he was want to do that. Cecil B. DeMille was such a great director, and he did these great epics, but to keep them relatable, he would pick people out and give them parts that people could relate to. Now, so many times we just see the special effect. There's no story. There's no actual people that you can relate to, but not him. He was a great cinema king.
Now, I know you are kind of this beacon of fabulousness in Hollywood, and you don't tend to spill a lot of tea, but tell me about that Red Sea. How did Charlton Heston find that incredible magic to part it, and what was the Red Sea made of?
Well, I was on a big paper mache mountain that was inside a studio, and we were surrounded by big catwalks with vats of water. So when action came, all the water was to descend on us from the vats onto the paper mache. So it was great. I climbed up into Nina Foch's arms, and he's parting the Red Sea, which he did quite well. The Red Sea was made of Jell-O because Jell-O wiggles a lot and looks a lot like water. So that's the secret of the Red Sea.
You look back at that movie, and it is now considered, one of the greats when you think of biblical epics. I mean, do you pinch yourself thinking, I was in that?
No, other people seem more in awe that I was in that and of the movie itself. I was a little girl, and I just thought, well, this is what you're supposed to do. I was more enamored when I was doing the movie with the menagerie that they kept on the set at Paramount, which included a pregnant donkey. I always wanted to see the little baby donkey, but it had lambs and, camels and horses. Oh my, there were all kinds of animals. And that intrigued me much more than the cameras and the lights and everything else.
Was Charlton Heston a very nice man? Did you find him warm and engaging?
Absolutely. He was awesome in all aspects of that word. And I was quite lucky to remain friends with him up all the way until he died. And I had some beautiful pictures that were taken of him and me. And I sent them to him and I said, could you autograph these? And he sent them back with a lovely note. And I was also dating someone right before he started to get dementia, who was a great tennis player. And so we would go to Charlton Heston's house and they would play tennis, and his wife Lydia would bring me over lemonade. But he was very, he was astounding to me.
It must have been heartbreaking for you, Kathy, to see such an astonishing man of such incredible towering strength felled by dementia, by Alzheimer's disease. Must just have been so awful.
Yes, it was very sad. And my mother had Alzheimer's. In one of my newest movies, I play a woman who is on the edge of Alzheimer's and dementia and is going down that route. And I used them both. When you're an actor, you call on different things to develop a character. And I remember Charlton and of course my mother, who unfortunately passed with people, many times. I mean, they don't die of Alzheimer's, but of pneumonia, but it was very sad.
You had a recurring role in the Patty Duke show. What was the Patty Duke like that you got to know?
Patty was fabulous. She was such a professional. And when I played her friend Monica on the Patty Duke show, she would just come onto the set. I had just started UCLA at that time. And she said, okay, what's next? Let's get going. We got along very, very well. And we stayed friends until her death. And she wrote the foreword to one of my books, Surviving Cissy. And I knew her quite well. As a matter of fact, just this last year, she was writing a book along with her friend, William Jankowski. And he had reams and reams of interviews with her. And she died just before it came out. But I was very honored that they asked me to do the audiobook version of it, which is In the Presence of Greatness. And it was so interesting to me as I was reading it and narrating it. It was almost like I was channeling Patty, like she was sitting right next to me, and I got her spirit and the way that she talked. I actually just won 2 weeks ago a silver award from the Here Now Foundation for one of the best audiobooks. So I'm very proud of that.
I remember reading years ago, Call Me Anna, where she talked about her mental struggles and all of those things that went on in her life. I mean, it was such a tumultuous life for so many years, wasn't it?
It was. And I think she kept, some of that inside all the way till the end. However, I think that when she discovered her bipolarism, I think she understood more about who she was. And it wasn't that she was just this crazed person that all of a sudden went off the thing, but there was actually a chemical kind of thing that caused that type of behavior. And that, I think, contributed to having her be more at peace with herself. And her last husband Michael was such a dear, and they lived in Idaho then. So she was at peace, and she loved her grandchildren, and she, I think, came to terms with who she was and what she had accomplished, and became very proud of that, as well she should be, an Academy Award winner. And she realized that she had made some mistakes during her life, that she wasn't a very good businesswoman, and she spent more than she should, and perhaps she shouldn't have gone out with a couple people that she did go out with. But I really do think that she found peace and she found happiness with her sons and with her husband at the end.
We opened our chat with a little musical interlude, which I don't normally do because I'm so not musical, but it was the wonderful...
Yeah, you were flat on that a couple times and the rhythm was off a little bit. But I forgive you.
Kathy, I'm the first to admit it. I mean, I could not hit a note with a sledgehammer. And I was like...
Now you got it.
But I mean, that theme, of course, so known all around the world in heavens knows how many countries, in a show still so loved today. We're talking Family Affair, 1966. How did you get that role?
As you know, I've been working all my life and I was at UCLA. I was going to college and I still had my childhood agent and I was at the sorority. And so she called, my mom called and said, Hazel McMillan was my agent's name. She's, there's an interview for you, and we've got to go over to Hollywood from UCLA this afternoon right away. They've already sold the series. The whole thing is cast except for the teenage girl. And we think that you would be perfect for this. And so I went to, and Virginia Martindale was the casting director, and I had known Virginia, but she says, well, you're going to go straight to producer. So I went and I dressed, I was supposed to be 15 and I was a little bit older than that, but I put on something that I thought was, I'll still remember it, you know, a maroon, not cashmere, but a maroon wool sweater and a maroon little wool skirt. And I thought, okay, I look 15, I can do that. But now here's the thing, they wanted a blonde. Now I'm blonde now, but at that time I had dark hair to go along with my dark eyes. And they wanted a blonde, but my mom always seemed to solve so many problems. She came over to the sorority house to get me, and she had this can of what is called Streaks and Tips. You spray it on your hair and it makes you blonde instantly. And I said, oh, Mom, thank you. I said, come on, we got to go. So we went over to see Mr. Hartman, Ed Hartman, who was the creator, writer, producer, along with the producing with Don Feddersen. So I'm in his office and we're chatting and I'm trying to be amenable and nice. And I didn't even read a script. I think that they just wanted to see the personality, etc. And so we're chatting and he said, what's wrong with your hair? I said, my hair. And he said, yes, it's like turning green. I don't know what that could, you know, it's probably the light. Well, it made us start laughing and chatting. And so I thought, oh, well, I don't know how well that went. The next day, Hazel calls me up and he says, you got the job. You are going to be in this series. I said, well, that's great. So there's a caveat. And because I had, she says, you need to go to Max Factor and get a wig. And I said, oh, okay. I went to Max Factor, got a long blonde wig, blue trek dress, and I did the screen test. Okay, so there is a second step to this. I said, oh, okay. Then after that, she calls and she said, all right, you are definitely in now, but never wear that blonde wig and never wear that dress again. I said, okay. And I was surrounded by all of my sorority sisters. I said, I got the job. And they all yelled and screamed. And that's the road that we're still watching this show today.
You, of course, were Cissy, the eldest of the two twins, Jodie and Buffy. Was it a happy show to work on, Kathy?
Sure. And especially because we had two little kids, it was very family friendly, nice people. There was no swearing. People weren't mad at each other. It was difficult in one respect because it employed the Feddersen method. And at that time, it was very difficult to get movie stars to come and actually appear in that little box. That was called television. And the producer, Don Feddersen, had gotten Fred McMurray to play in My Three Sons. So he says, well, we're going to use the same method. So they tried to get Glenn Ford, but he says, I don't care. I'm not going to do television, really. So he then approached Brian, who had just finished The Parent Trap and showed, you know, Mr. Macho with this great, wonderful, familial, funny side to himself. And he said, okay. But it meant that he would only work like 2 months and get all the scenes that he was in. And then he could go off and do movies.
Mhm.
And that was very appealing. The other thing that really sealed the deal was when they gave him a financial part of the show. And that's what they had done with Fred McMurray. And that was very rare at that time. The actors didn't get a financial piece. They got their salary, but not a piece of ownership. So what that meant for us, Brian would shoot all his scenes and then we would come back from maybe 4 different shows, but just his scenes. So then the whole rest of the cast would have to come back and then we'd pick up all the scenes. And there we would have our 38 episodes.
The Brian you're referring to, of course, the late, great Brian Keith. I know you and Brian became great friends and remain so. What was he like as a man, as a person?
He absolutely adored children. He loved kids. And even though he was this macho guy and he at one time drank a lot during his life, he kind of gave up the drinking when he was a father, and he and his wife adopted some children. So with all of his manliness, he had this very sensitive heart. And that's what made him, I think, a very good actor as well, because he had the sensitivity along with the strength. And he was, he could have been the biggest star in Hollywood, but he absolutely abhorred publicity. He didn't like, all of that hoopla. He wanted to do the work and prove himself. And his parents were in the business as well, and they would take him along when they were doing vaudeville. So he grew up on all of that. But he was a very kind man, except for people he didn't like. And if he didn't like it, they knew he didn't like it.
He may have been Hollywood royalty. Indeed, he was. All that fame and that fortune, as you say, he didn't like playing the Hollywood game, so he just loved the work and went home and had his private life. But in many respects, that private life was heartbreaking, wasn't it? I think I read somewhere that his daughter Daisy took her own life. How would that affect somebody who was just such an incredible, loving father? How do you rebound back from something like that?
Well, I don't think he really did. It depressed him so. And he, not very long after that, he was diagnosed with cancer and given like 6 weeks really to live. And he was in such a depressive state because of Daisy that he says, hey, I've always been in charge of my own life. I'm going to be in charge of my own death. And so he committed suicide and couldn't live with the grief, and he was going to die. And so it was a very sad ending. But even being a Catholic, he was buried in a Catholic burial ground, which, what I'm sure made him quite happy.
As such a close friend as you were, Kathy, again, how do you reconcile something like that? I
tuck it away in a part of myself that I don't want to deal with, and then it might come out at an inappropriate time. But sometimes grief you just can't deal with, and you don't in that way. What I did do was posthumously arrange with some other people to get him a star on the Walk of Stars. And I made a speech when the star was uncovered. And I said, I don't know if Brian would like this or not, but other people I'm sure will enjoy it and have his legacy continue, as one of our brightest stars in Hollywood.
He was a man of such immense energy and extraordinary charisma and personality. Do you sometimes feel him around you? Do you feel he's like maybe an angel on your shoulder? Or when you least expect it, you just feel Brian Keith there with you?
Yes, and especially I do a show in Kanab, Utah, Legends, Western Legends. Mm-hmm. And it was where he shot some Western films. And I stay in the Perry's Lodge where everybody stayed. And I know when I have stayed there Brian is there. That's especially when I feel him the most, is when I go up to this Kanab, and I'm going in August. And so I imagine I'll feel his spirit. I accepted for him an award. They have a little Hollywood Walk of Fame in Kanab, and I accepted an award for him about 4 or 5 years ago when they were putting it there. But especially there in that beautiful area of our Zion National Park, and all of Utah is just so gorgeous. But that's where I feel him the most.
Do you think now he's at peace, Kathy? Do you feel that within his spirit?
No, I don't. It's that pulsing energy I feel, and that the way that he has affected people, and I like to take him into myself as well, and hope that his spirit guides me. So, and I think he's like putting it out there, and maybe he's still a little restless.
It was kind of a double blow, really, wasn't it? Because you think of Family Affair, such a beautiful, fun-loving show full of such warmth. And there was Brian Keith's passing, and then Anissa Jones, of course, who played Buffy, who after the show became mired in just personal issues and drugs and things. And then she was, 18, I think, when she left us.
Yes, that was a definite tragedy. And I wrote a book on ex-child stars, where are they now, and everything that a child star has to deal with. And she was like 8 when the Family Affair began. Johnny was 6. She was a little older, but she was already like 13 and carrying around her doll, and she wanted to be a teenager. So that affected, it's a very important part of growing up, that tween age and a teenager. And so I think it really was sad, and more that she could handle, and that she got really involved with the wrong peer group.
Johnny Whitaker too had his troubles, but he is now well and truly over all of that in terms of drugs and drink and whatever else, and is quite the counsel, isn't he, for other people who are going through similar problems?
Well, I think unfortunately what happens is, like, Johnny has an addictive personality. So at one time, he's addicted to alcohol, and then he's addicted to drugs. And then he gets over that, but then he was addicted to food, and he gained like 200 pounds. And then now I think that he is addicted to a religion. So you can get rid of all of these things, but personally, I think that if you don't get rid of the source and the reason why one becomes so addicted to something, then you can't really put your teeth into life.
Why did your life not veer into kind of dark corners and addictions and so forth? How was it that you were able to just keep working without having fallen into those traps and pitfalls?
Well, one thing, I had fabulous parents, and they didn't use me as their own personal bank. They have their own lives. My father was an architect, and my mother was with me through all of that. I had an education. I got a bachelor's degree from UCLA. And again, my parents tried to keep me, when I was a child, as normal as possible. So they didn't do a lot of the star thing and this and that. And when you go back to school, just say that you were out, not that you were starring in a film or doing something. So I think they tried to keep me as normal as possible. I have a couple tics left over, not quite normal. That's a joke. But and another thing, I never took drugs. I mean, that is the downfall of so many a great man or woman. And it is not only just children, it's grown-up actors. I have so many of my peers that have died lately, and still because they're, overdose. And even if they say, oh, well, we're taking marijuana, it affects your mind. And especially when you get into your 60s or older, and you've been taking them, since you were 18, it's not good for the body. So I have just been blessed that I have a spiritual connection. I like God. We've got a good relationship going. I do drink. And I know Australia has some very nice wines. My husband puts out a little glass of Chardonnay on the table for me. every night at 5 o'clock. I've been married for 42 years. I have a great son, and my son never left home. And he invited his girlfriend to live with us 10 years ago. So it's like I have a chicken, another chick in the nest.
Oh, wow.
So my and they probably will always be with me, which I like at this time in my, they're 32 and they are so much fun and they are just delightful. And I like having as does my husband, we like having the kids around. We call them at 32.
Yeah.
Our kids, yeah.
With regard to Family Affair, though, we couldn't wrap up our chat on that part of your life without talking about Sebastian Cabot. Mr. French, the gentleman's gentleman. He just seems so lusciously pompous as that character. So I'm assuming that Sebastian Cabot was maybe nothing like that, or maybe was he a little like Giles French?
No, he was not like him. He was. I went over to his house a couple times, and once for dinner, and he's wearing sweats and he's just relaxing and he's having a good time and he's cooking in the kitchen and he's quite a family man. Again, both Brian and especially Sebastian, he had beautiful, wonderful wife, Kay, and they had 2 older children, and then they had a younger one who appeared a couple times on Family Affair, as did their older daughter. And he was a relaxed family man, and his accent sometimes would go into little Cockney rather than the very polished English that he would utilize to be a gentleman's gentleman.
I read somewhere, despite an amazing career on stage and screen, he had trouble sometimes remembering his lines. Is that right? It was a real difficulty, but everybody rallied around him. That was the heart and soul and beauty of Family Affair, is it did have a heart and a soul and everybody did care.
Absolutely, because he really never had a formal education. I don't think he even finished high school, and he was in England and he was a chauffeur, and he would take around this very famous actor, and that's how he actually got into acting. But it was very hard for him to learn the lines, and he had this perseverance, and he was going to get every single line right. So our script person worked with him every day, and on the weekends, I know that he would go over his lines, so he would have them just perfect, and I respected him a lot for that. I have a tendency to be that way. Brian, on the other hand, it didn't matter what it said. He'd say, He'd get the gist of it and then kind of improvise it most of the way. But Sebastian would always be in there exactly with his lines, the way that they were written. And the writers like that.
Now, of course, Cissy is still very much in the here and now. I think it was about 3 years ago. She wound up with her own spin-off show almost 50 years after Family Affair finished. Was that fun to bring her back?
Absolutely. I really liked my character. And so many times people ask other actors, well, were you typecast? Were you this, were you that? I said, I like my character. And my character had like 70% of me in that character in the first place. Of course, it's always been my belief. You cannot just make a character out of thin air. It comes from your own heart, your own soul. You can't transform that. You can take on a particular language, you can take on a walk, but your heart and spirit is always yours. So Aunt Cissy was always is my heart and my spirit, just a little older, more wrinkles and this and that, but it was fun.
Yeah, well, I tell you what, she's a survivor, because when you think about Family Affair, it's now only you and Johnny Whitaker, really, of the main stars that are still with us in the here and now.
Yes, and that was the crux of one of my other books, which was Surviving Cissy. And I do believe that I was able to survive that Hollywood stereotype and be my own person and find my way through life all through its ups and downs, and houses burning down and losing jobs and this and that, because I persevere. And I think you just got it, Churchill, never give up. never, 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 never give up. And your life might take you in different directions. I've always stayed in the entertainment field, but I've done things within the field. So it wasn't just a television actor, because I'm a film actress and because I taught for 20 years voiceover. I've done like 6 animated series, and I've done a lot of ADR. We've like looped many films, and I've done like over 80 audiobooks. So it's all been in the realm, but if I'm not on the stage, okay. And I've written like 5 books, 2 more coming out this year. So there's up and down times. I like to fill those times. So if I'm not doing a film role, okay, well, I'm going to start on this book. And if I get my book finished, okay, now I'm going to do a play. But it's always, working. I like to work.
Are you talking about your books? I've got one in my hot little hand here from when we were last together. And I have to say, this is a beauty. Holiday recipes for a family affair. And I mean, I'm not going to open it because the pages are quite stained with gravy and all sorts of other things. It has been well thumbed. Your meatloaf recipe is an absolute rip-roarer. And so many of those recipes in there are. I mean, you have this ability to be just so adept at diversifying, Kathy. And that, would you say that is the secret to your continued success?
Yes, I would. I probably, if I had to do it over, I would have probably set my bar to say, all right, you can be a star. It's okay. Because what I set my goal to be when I was 20, I wanted to be a working actor. I think at that time, I didn't want a lot of invasion of my own privacy. And so I had seen like maybe people like Peg or other people being destroyed by the business. And I said, I just want to work. I enjoy working. And it was more of a Brian-esque type of approach. I would have said that, but I'll tell you one thing, it has kept me, my feet on the ground, and I've been able to be pretty successful financially. I don't have millions and billions of dollars, but I also, I have lovely homes. I have some real estate. I have little investments here and there. So it's all just fine. And I have my sanity. Hello, thank you very much. And yes. I'm able to enjoy things from me, not from a drug haze.
A little while ago, I mentioned your son, who in a funny kind of way helped you get a role in the Princess Diaries with Julie Andrews and Anne Hathaway. And you have such a beautiful little role in that, to do with the cable car. Is that true? It was because your son had a little role in that movie, and you're on set with him, and bingo, you wind up in the movie.
Yes. My son had a small part in the Princess Diaries. So as a good mother, I took him there, and I was standing by on the sidelines when I saw my friend Barry Barsamian come up, and he was going to interview Julie Andrews for a paper that he had. And so he was talking to the associate producer, and he said, that's Kathy Garver from Family Affair. And she says, it is? She says, oh, well, Gary would love to meet her. Gary Marshall, who was the director and producer of the Princess Diaries. So I went over to meet Gary. I hadn't met him before. And he says, I love Brian. He was so wonderful to work with and to deal with. And then he said, would you like to be in this movie? I said, yes, I would. I'd love to be in this movie. He says, great. I says, I'm going to write some scene tonight, and you come back, and you'll have a scene there with your son. And I said, well, okay, that's going to be fun. And that's not apocryphal. That really actually happened. What
was it like to be there with Julie Andrews and Anne Hathaway?
Julie was just a trooper. Mm-hmm. And she would be standing there, and she was doing exercises and holding onto the cable car. And she was just a delight. And this was like, I think one of her first movies, just was full of energy and fun and a delight to be with.
You talked about that television show you did, the chat show backstage. You got to interview some absolute legends on that, didn't you? Like Jane Russell.
And I believe that it was Jane Russell's last interview with anyone. Barry Barsamian and I had that. We interviewed Patty Duke, and some really interesting and wonderful people. I've hosted, that's another thing I've done. I've hosted about like 5 talk shows. So when one is coming up, I think I'm going to be doing a show called TV Dinners. That's one of my new books that's coming out, TV Dinners, TV, along with Romancing with the Stars. And I'm writing that with my friend Doug Hartline. I'm really enjoying it. And it's how people met, celebrities met. We have different, Keith Thibodeau, that was the Little Ricky, is one of our people that's in it. Marta Kristen,
Yes.
from Lost in Space, how they met their husbands or their wives, and what a romantic thing is. And then we have a romantic place that's a travel place where you can recreate where they were, and then different travel places that you could go. So that's coming out at the end of the year. And I wanted to tell you about my Aussie connections, that one of my latest films, it's either feast or famine.
Yes.
But I had 2 movie premieres within the space of a week. So just last Thursday, we did the premiere of my movie Yellowbird, and the producer and the star and the director was an Aussie, and his name is Angus Benfield. He plays my son in the movie, and he's just wonderful. And this is the role where I have a little touch of dementia, but it's a comedy, and it has won 4 Best Picture awards and Best Comedy that we just won at the LA Film Fest, and that's where it premiered. So it's already on our Amazon Prime, and it's on like 3 other streaming platforms here, and it's been quite a success. Now, this was followed by 2 days ago. What is today? Sunday. It's Sunday for you, Saturday for me. Yes. So I guess it was just 2 days ago, they premiered my other film, where I star as Mrs. Gloria Mavis Jackson in the movie Old Man Jackson. And it is just a delight. We had 3 sold out theaters for its premiere. Everybody applauded. Everybody loved it. So I have 2 very successful movies that just came out, which I'm exceedingly happy about. But I may be coming to Australia, which I'm even more happy about. I've always wanted to go. And as you know, it's a wee bit of a way from the United States, and I'm especially in California. So, but I'm working on a movie with Nadia Tass.
Oh,
who
great.
Is she's a wonderful award-winning director. And she's also the producer of this movie called Pollyanna's Wish. We're getting our final financing through Screen Australia is kindly giving us a nice bit of it, and some rebates. I'm going to be playing an Australian. So and Nadia's saying, well, now, Kathy, can you do this Australian? I said, well, yes, Nadia, I could do an Australian accent. But the way I'm going to do it is because I'm in my car. I'm in California all the time, and I'm always asking the person in the GPS to talk, or I ask them what time. So I'm going to put it in as an Australian accent. You can make it French or Australian or English, whatever. So this is the way I'm going to learn my Australian accent, as well as Angus, who's of course Australian. And he's working on this, going to be working on this film. He'll be doing all the distribution for the film. But I'm excited about Australia. And then my 4th recent, this is all the 4th, you're my 5th. This is all happening like in about 2 months, all my Australian connections. So, and now here I am talking to you, Craig, and with the beautiful Kelley, that's a producer here. And it's the Australian year.
And just before we started chatting, you mentioned that the movie with Nadia Tass that is kind of in development now could well be shot in Queensland, where I am. And do you remember when we first met? I think it was about 2019, and I gave you those biscuits, as we call them here. So you need to know they're not cookies, they're biscuits. There's a little bit of an Australian jingoism for you. But those Tim Tams, you see, you could be reunited with a Tim Tam, Kathy Garver.
I mean, that is, lure enough to be there, on the next plane. And yes, we will be in Queensland. So we'll have to meet and have some Tim Tams. And I'm learning to say good day. So.
But I got to say, one final question. Mrs. Beasley, is she still around and about? How is she doing?
She is, well, not alive and well, but she is quite well. I actually did an exhibit at the Relics Museum here in California, and she had a prominent place.
Yes.
She is still being made by Ashton Drake, and I go to Comic-Cons and I sign her feet, and people absolutely adore her to this day. I have a friend of mine, and the original Mrs. Beasley, it had just been put up for auction and is being auctioned off. So yes, she is not alive and well, but plastic and well and ready to be loved.
Sounds like most of Hollywood. I absolutely adore chatting with you, Kathy Garver. There's not a lot of people you could hang this tag to, but definitely you're an absolute bona fide Tinseltown treasure.
Oh, thank you, Craig. And you're the best. And Kelley, thank you so much for all your help.